the whole chaos of war. Well, I thought she was watching a movie. She wasn't. She was actually watching a historic battle that took place 200 years ago between the Native Americans and the United States cavalry. Well, I thought to myself in my mind, how was that possible? We didn't have video cameras back then.
So, hi, Soul Family, and welcome to my channel. I'm your host, Haji, and this is Amazing NDE Stories. Our guest today is John J. Davis. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, Haji, thanks for having me on. I so appreciate you inviting me on your show. I love to share my story, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to share it.
Are
Perfect,
you
perfect.
ready, John?
Okay. I'm ready.
Jump in and tell us about your amazing NDE experience.
Sure, sure. Well, Haji, I'll start from the beginning. How this all started for me was this happened when I was 21. And what's so extraordinary is I remember every single detail that happened all through these years. I've never lost any memories about my experience. And I think that has to do with God, because normally my memory is really bad. Like I can't remember what I did yesterday. So the fact that I remember every single detail is something that I think was given to me when I had my NDE so that I could share my story. So I like to let people know that I remember everything like it happened just the other day. That's why I'm able to share my story so clearly. Well, here's how it happened. My dad was in sales his whole career, and he won a sales contest. And what he won were these two mopeds, or what we would call scooters. And we used to ride these things all over the neighborhoods, especially on the weekends. One day I was out riding and I had an accident and I slammed into a tree. And the way that I landed, I tore the tendons off my right hand. And I had to have surgery to have them reattached. When I was 21, I had never really spent much time at all in a hospital. I had never had surgery before, so I didn't know what to expect. So the day the surgery comes and I go in, and when they start to give me the anesthesia, I had a horrible reaction and it stopped my heart. And I'd actually died. And that's how my story starts. And something I want to back up a little bit so I can give your audience kind of a little bit of context. When we hear about a lot of NDEs, people who have had near-death experiences, a lot of times there's some kind of an accident or they're having surgery like I was, and for whatever reason they die, and they find themselves floating above their bodies. They're looking down and they can see everything happening. Then they become aware of a tunnel and they start moving down this tunnel. And then at the end of the tunnel, there's this beautiful, bright white light. Well, then they're met by somebody in the tunnel, whether it's a parent, a loved one, a friend, somebody who had crossed before them, who tells them it's not your time. You have to go back. Well, we never knew what happened, what's on the other side of that white light. And I think of my experience as kind of like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle. And my piece that I brought back is that my whole story starts on what happens on the other end of that white light. And I don't know how this happened, but for whatever reason, I didn't experience the tunnel or the being above my body looking down. They just started me on the other side of the white light. And that's where my story starts. So the very second that I died, the next instant I woke up, opened up my eyes, and I was standing in the most beautiful building I had ever seen. If you can imagine a beautiful white polished marble building, and it was this long, long corridor kind of building. It was so long that I could not see the end of this building where it ended. On the right-hand side of me were these huge, tall, 20 or 30 feet white marble columns, just like you might see in Greece or in Rome. And they went all the way down this corridor about 6 feet apart. In front of me, where I was standing in the middle of the building, were these tables, just like they looked like an ordinary kitchen table, but they were made of marble, and they had four seats on each side of the table, again, as far down as you could see, and every table had two people sitting there. Well, right about this time, in my left ear, I heard, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." Well, I learned through this whole process that all of us have spirit guides. Everybody does. And what the spirit guide is, it's a friend, it's a soul on the other side who helps us plan our lifetimes. And they are with us throughout our entire lives. So what happened is my guide Alan took me to all these different places on the other side. And he took me to the outside of the building first, and then he took me to the inside so I could see what happened inside that building. So he was with me during the whole NDE. He was talking to me and telling me what I was seeing. So the building that I was in the very first part of my experience is called the Orientation Center. It's the very first step when a person finishes their lifetime and they're done. They go back to the other side, or heaven, or the afterlife, whatever you want to call it, and they cross into the light, and they end up in the Orientation Center. Well, to the left of me in this building, if you can imagine, again, beautiful white marble as far down as you could see, there were doorways. They looked like tunnels that had looked like they had been cut out perfectly out of solid marble, just like a doorway. And my guide said, "Look at the next tunnel." So I looked up, and the very second I looked at the next tunnel, a man was coming through this tunnel. And these doorways were they looked like an average doorway, maybe 8 feet tall, and they were about 5 feet apart were these tunnels. And this man came through, and he was an elderly gentleman, probably in his 80s or his 90s, and he had his right hand holding his chest like he was in pain. And my guide said he just died from a heart attack. So he was coming down this tunnel into the white light, and he ends up in the Orientation Center. Well, my guide said that everybody on the other side, everybody has things that they love to do more than anything else. Some people like to paint, some people like to write, some people like to go hiking. Whatever you like to do here on earth, you can do on the other side. And he told me that the two people that were sitting at each one of these tables next to these tunnels, they're called orientation counselors. And their whole job is to help welcome people back from an earth life. And what they do is, many of us forget where we're from. Because earth, I learned that earth isn't home. The other side is our real home. We're just here on earth to come in temporarily to learn and to experience, kind of like a schoolroom or a school. So what this woman was, she was an orientation counselor. Well, all of a sudden she stood up and she walked over to this tunnel where this man was. She took his hands in hers and she walked him back to the tables, and they sat down. She had him sit across from her. Well, my viewpoint was I could see her, but I couldn't see the man because I was looking at his back, and I was too far away to hear what she was saying. But she was talking to him. And my guide said that what the orientation counselors do is they help people remember where they're from. Because when we go into a lifetime, most of us forget our memories of the other side. We forget where we're really from. So the orientation counselors help people remember where they're from. And they say things like, "You just finished your lifetime. Now you're back on the other side. You made it, and you're home again." And as my guide said, "Watch him." So I started watching the back of him, and right in front of me, right in front of my eyes, he began to change from an elderly gentleman to a man in his 30s. And it happened, Haji, in about maybe 25, 30 seconds. I could just see his whole visage change. And on the other side, my guide told me that all of us are young. We're in our early 30s. And I didn't think to ask why. I didn't know if that was because Jesus died when he was 33, or what the reason was. Because the whole thing about my NDE is I didn't know that I had died. I didn't know I had died until the whole thing was over and I was back in the operating room. So this whole thing was unfolding, and I think if I had known that I died, I would have asked so many more questions. I just didn't know that. So as she was talking to this gentleman, and he turned back into his 30s again, she was done, and I got the feeling that he had all of his memories back again, and he was back on the other side. Well, he stood up and he walked off to the right, down between these columns. There were three marble steps that led down into what I call the gardens. I don't know if the other side calls them that, but that's what it looked like to me. And when I watched this man go down into these gardens, it was the most beautiful experience. I mean, the most beautiful gardens I had ever seen. The grass, it looked like it was alive. It looked like it was emerald green. It was absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. And there were plants and flowers and trees, and it looked absolutely manicured, perfect, like an English garden looks. And there were all these people there. And my guide said that every one of us, when we finish our lives, we go into the tunnel, we go into the white light, we go through orientation, and then we go into what they call the reunion. And what that is it's everybody that you know who passed before you are waiting for you in the reunion area. And it's not just the people you knew in your lifetime, it's all the people you knew on the other side before you came into that last life. And the reason that they're there is they were applauding this guy, laughing, and everybody was hugging him and smiling and laughing and telling him what a great job he had done. The reason that they do this is I found out from my guide that when we have a lifetime on Earth, it's a really big deal for them because I was told, life on this planet is the hardest of all the other worlds. Earth is the hardest. So when we come here, when we're brave enough to come here, it's actually a really big deal because there are many, many souls who don't want to come here. They'd rather go somewhere else because it's so hard. And so when we finish a life and we go back, everyone is there to welcome us home again. I just thought that was the neatest thing because there are so many people that all of us have lost that we're going to get to see again because nobody really dies. Everyone just goes back home again. And here's one of the neatest things is not only is it just people that you loved that were in your life, but all of your animals are there also. I found out that all of the animals that we have loved throughout our lifetimes, they're with us on the other side. And I think that's something that God gave all of us, were these beautiful, unconditional, loving little creatures we call our pets and our animals that live with us for eternity. So that was called the orientation. And one thing your audience that I want to share with them, one day I was scrolling around on Google one day, and I came across this building that is in the country of Turkey. And it's called, on Google, it's called the Temple of Artemis, Artemis, the Temple of Artemis. And that's a temple in the country of Turkey. And it looks just like the building that the Orientation Center is, but it's just so much longer. But it gives people an idea of what some of these buildings looked like. And to kind of clarify this for your audience, my guide took me to what felt like a college campus because it was in one area and there were all these different buildings. And like one building was like a history building, like on college campuses, you have an English building, a science building, music, something like that. That's kind of what it felt like where I was. It was full of activity and I saw all kinds of people, and I'll explain that in just a little bit too. But it felt like I was on some kind of a college campus, but it was only a very small area of the other side. The other side is kind of like a planet. It's gigantic, but they only took me to one small part of it because I think I didn't have a lot of time. So that was called the orientation, then the reunion, and then Alan, my guide, took me to another building. And again, he took me to the outside first, and it was this huge rectangular building. We have nothing on Earth that represents how large these buildings were. I can't even describe to you how large they were, just gigantic. And there were those white marble columns all around the perimeter. So he takes me to the inside and to one of the rooms inside, and it was around. The only way I can describe it is it was like a theater, but it was round. It was a round theater. And instead of having a movie screen in the front, the movie screens were up on the top, all around me in a big circle in this room. And my guide said, "This is where you have a life review." And all of a sudden, every single one of these video screens, these movie screens, started playing. And what they were episodes of my lifetime, all the way up to the age that I was, which was 21. So one of the screens was showing me as a little toddler in a crib. Another one was showing me as, starting kindergarten. Another screen showed me in elementary school. And every one of these screens, there must have been 15 or 20 of these screens. And as I looked around in a circle, every single screen had a different episode of my life playing. And my guide told me that all of us will go through a life review when we finish our last lifetime. And the idea behind a life review is to see, did you accomplish everything that you wanted to accomplish in that lifetime? Well, he also took it one step further. The other reason we have a life review is they show you different aspects about your life that they think are wonderful. And the only people that are with you really is just your guide to help you see how you did in that life. And some of the things that they show you are things that you never think twice about. Like when I was a little kid in elementary school, there was another student, his name was Troy. And I think he had MS because he had to walk with crutches. And one day in the playground, he fell. Another friend of mine ran up to him and picked him up. Well, I never thought twice about that. But that was one of the things that they showed me during the life review, to say that this really was a magnificent thing that you did. It was an incredible thing you did to help this kid. And that's what the other side looks at. Did you make a difference in someone else's life? Well, on the other end of that, you also feel and experience the times that you hurt other people. So if you intentionally hurt somebody, you will feel in that life review what that person felt. So the whole idea of the life review is to see, how did you do, and to kind of learn from that. Nobody judges us. There's no one that judges a lifetime. You basically judge yourself by doing a life review. And you can see how you did by looking at all these different screens. It was just absolutely amazing. And my guide said, everybody has to go through a life review. Nobody is able to escape that. That's one of the first things that they do once we get back. It was a life review. The next place he took me to, again, was another building. It was beautiful, gigantic building with columns all around the outside, kind of like what you would imagine Greece or Rome to look like back in the day. So he takes me to the inside, and the inside was a little bit different in the room he took me to. This room looked like a regular movie theater, just like we would go to today. It was long, and it had a movie screen up in front. And here's the part that, in one of the parts about my NDE that I had a hard time with, because he said he was going to show me past lifetimes. Well, I was raised a Catholic. My dad was very Catholic, and we went to Catholic church about 2 or 3 times a week, and then also on Sundays. And in Catholicism, there is no talk about having past lifetimes. So I didn't know what to think. So I just started watching the screen, and he showed me 3 different past lifetimes. So the screen comes on, and the first lifetime he shows me, I was an elderly gentleman. I was bald, I had a shaved head, and I was wearing a red gown, or kind of like a red tunic. And I was in a monastery. And my job in that life was to teach little kids about being monks and living in a monastery. And what was so interesting is that when I was watching that life, I knew what part of the world it was taking place, what part of the world that life took place in. And it was somewhere in Southeast Asia. So that one disappeared, and the next one came up, and I was a shoe peddler, and I had a little wheelbarrow, and I had all of these shoes in it. And my job in that lifetime was to fix people's shoes in that village. And that lifetime took place somewhere in Eastern Europe. As I was pushing this wheelbarrow, the road that I was on was a cobblestone road. And it was neat because I could see all those details. So then that one disappeared. The next one came on, and it was a life where I was a fisherman, and I was standing in kind of like a little raggedy kind of boat, and I had fishing nets that I would toss off into the water. And my job in that life was to help feed the village with fish. And that lifetime took place somewhere in the Middle East somewhere. And I was so interested in trying to find out if that was actually real that after I had my NDE, a couple months later, I went to see a hypnotherapist because I had heard that you could also see past lifetimes. Well, I was so skeptical that I went to see this woman and told her what had happened. And I said, I want to see if past lifetimes are real. Do we really have them? Well, sure enough, during the session, I was able to see more lifetimes. And I learned in my NDE that we can have as many lifetimes as we want. It's totally up to the individual soul. Nobody makes you come into a lifetime. Nobody says you have to go do this, you have to go do that. It's totally up to the individual. Nobody forces us to go back. So I thought that was pretty remarkable. And that was the part of my NDE where my guide wanted me to tell people that we really do have past lifetimes. And the reason is that so many people feel like when they get to the end of their lifetimes that they failed, that they didn't do this, they never became that, they didn't pursue that dream, they never found their love relationship, they never had kids. All of these things people feel so bad about. And one of the things my guide wanted me to tell people was that just the fact that you were brave enough to come here in the first place, you've already won the battle. You already won. And if you think you didn't do the things you wanted to do in that lifetime, you can always come back and have another life. So nobody really fails. You just come here to learn, to do your best. And then when you go home again, everything that you learned, everything that you came through, everything that you had to work through, that becomes part of who you are now. All those memories, all those experiences come with you. So that's what I thought was so incredible about having different lifetimes. So that was the past life building. That's what I call it, the past life building. The next place he took me to, again, was another gigantic building, but it was round. It was a beautiful round building, and it had white marble columns all around the circle, all around the circumference of this building. And there was a huge, big dome on top, a big domed building. And my guide said, this is where we go to plan a lifetime. And I didn't think to ask him why. Why do we go to this one place? But that's apparently where we go, and our guide goes with us. So we go on the inside, and he takes me to a table. Again, it was a beautiful marble, kind of a rectangular table. And there was a singular scroll that was a rolled up scroll on this table, and it had a blue ribbon around it. And I walked in, and I picked up the scroll. You know what? You know what? It looked like Egyptian papyrus. Have you ever seen Egyptian papyrus? It's kind of like that brown kind of paper like. And I folded, or I took off the ribbon and I folded out the scroll. I rolled it out. And the first thing I noticed was that it had black writing on it. And it looked like it was done in calligraphy. And I remember as a kid, we would have those ink pens that you would dip in an inkwell and write out. And that's what it looked like calligraphy. Well, my guide explained to me that everybody who comes into a lifetime writes out their goals ahead of time. And it's kind of like what a lot of us do when we have a New Year's resolution. When you plan a lifetime, you write out on these scrolls where you're going to be born into, what country, what language are you going to learn, who your parents are going to be, are you going to have kids, What kind of careers are you going to have? All these different things go into a lifetime. Well, when I tried to read mine, I tried to read it, it folded back up again. And I wasn't able to read what was on the scroll. And the reason was because I wasn't supposed to see anything that I had charted for myself. Because if I knew ahead of time, I might do something that would circumvent that experience. So my guide just wanted me to be able to tell people that your lifetime, nobody's lifetime is an accident. Everything gets planned ahead of time. And when you finish your life and you go back to the other side, you go back and you look at these scrolls to see how you did. And again, it's kind of like the same metaphor for when you have a New Year's resolution. At the end of the year, you pull your list back out and see, okay, how did I do? And that's the reason that we write these goals down on this papyrus. Well, right about then, I looked off to my right, and there was this huge, enormous, gigantic wall that went. It had to have been blocks. It could have been miles long, and it was full of people's scrolls. Everybody that had a lifetime when I was there on the other side, all their scrolls were on these walls, and those people were on Earth having their lifetime. So again, my guide just wanted me to be able to tell people that we really do plan our lives ahead of time. Well, this at that time, I looked off to my left, and there was this huge, beautiful, sprawling window. And as I looked out, there was a walkway, and this is the first time that I saw people, and all these people were walking by, and there were people that some people were tall, some people were short, every ethnicity, every race, everybody was represented there. And what it looked like, when you go to a large city and it's lunchtime and you see all these people going back and forth outside, that's what it looked like. And it was really busy. Wherever I was on the other side, it was full of activity. There was a lot of people around. And people have always asked me, what do we look like? Are we just little balls of energy floating around? And that's not what I saw. What I saw were people that looked just like you and I look. And the bodies that we have, they're better. They're better bodies. You know how in the book of Genesis in the Bible, it says we are made in the image and likeness of God? I totally believe that because our bodies here on earth are kind of like shadow bodies. They're not perfect. They get sick, they might break down, they age, all these things happen to us here on earth. That's by design because we're not supposed to be here forever. We're supposed to age and we're supposed to finish the life and then we go back home. So everybody had bodies just like we do, but they're on the other side, the bodies are so much better. They don't get sick, they don't break, they don't age, they don't get hurt. They're perfect bodies. Well, on the other side of that walkway, I could see a lake. And this is when my guide told me that everything that's on earth that you find beautiful is also on the other side. Every kind of nature, there's oceans there are mountains and rivers and lakes. And the lake, and right across this walkway, there was a lake. And it was a beautiful round lake, just gorgeous. And it was so calm, it looked like glass. The surface looked like glass. And the water was so clear that I could see the bottom of the lake. And around the whole circumference of this lake were these beautiful weeping willow trees. Have you ever seen weeping willow trees? Yeah, they're the ones that their branches come over like this, and all the branches, all the leaves were sitting on the surface of the water. It was absolutely the most beautiful scene of nature that I have ever seen. And one thing that I wanted to tell your audience also is that when my guide said to me that everything that you like to do on earth, you can also do on the other side. So whether it's whatever you love to do, you can go to music festivals, you can take classes, you can go to lectures, you can paint, you can hike. Anything you love to do, you can do over there. And if you just want to sit around and visit with family and friends, you can do that too. So that was the building with the big dome on it. The next place he took me to I think was my absolute favorite because it's the one that I think the most about even to this day. Again, he did the same thing. He took me to the outside of this building first. And what it looked like, it was a huge stadium, like you go see soccer or football, something like that. And then he takes me to the inside. On the inside, I remember all the lights were on, and it was really bright in this building. And there were thousands and thousands of seats. And what it was is my guide took me to a planetarium. Did you ever remember when you were a kid and you might take a field trip to a planetarium and they show you on the ceiling like different planets and stars and things like that? That's what this was. And I was standing in the middle of this planetarium, and there was a gentleman behind me, and he was the one that ran the planetarium. Remember how we talked about that everybody on the other side has certain things that they love to do? Well, this man that was in the planetarium, he was an expert, you could call him, on astronomy. He knew everything about the planets, the different galaxies, the light that the speed that light travels, all these different astronomy things he knew about. And what he liked to do was run this planetarium. And he said to me, "Let's begin." So all the lights went off. It was pitch black. And he said to me, "When you look at the stars, this is what you see." And what he was referring to is everybody on Earth at that time, at their level of knowledge and development, this is what they see when they look at the stars. And all of a sudden, he started showing me our solar system. First, it was Earth, then our sun, then Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus and Mars. All of our solar system showed up on the ceiling, and then it disappeared. And then he said, when we look at the stars, this is what we see. And what he was referring to was everybody on the other side, at their level of knowledge and development, this is what they see. And all of a sudden, planet after planet after planet started showing up. There were blue planets like Earth. Some were red, some were yellow, some were brown. And pretty soon there were millions and millions of planets that popped up on the ceiling. And he said to me, there is far more life in the universe than you can possibly know. And I think that there were two reasons why my guide took me here. The first one was to tell me so that I could tell people that Earth is not the only inhabited planet. There are virtually limitless worlds in the universe. And the second reason I think was to I could tell people that Earth is not the only place where you have a lifetime. There are virtually billions of other planets that have life. And I want to tell your audience something that I found that I thought was so interesting. I have always loved space and astronomy. I grew up watching, do you remember the original Star Trek Captain Kirk? Remember that show? Yeah, I'm sure a lot of your audience probably does too. And I love that show. And when I was in college, I enrolled in a astronomy class because I thought it'd be so fascinating to learn all that stuff. Well, I actually had to drop it because I could not understand the math. But I've always loved astronomy. And I was reading an article just recently about this woman who was an astronomer, and she was trying to explain to the layperson how large our galaxy actually is, in trying to give people an idea of how large the universe really is. And she said that if you had a spaceship on Earth that could travel from one end of the galaxy to the other, and the fastest speed that we know is 186,000 miles per second, which is the speed of light. She said if you took this ship to the other end of our galaxy and they started going to the other end of our galaxy, one end to the other, it would take 99,000 years to get to the other end of just our galaxy. And I was reading an article just the other day, I was on NASA's website, and they said that they have found so far 285,000 other galaxies that they have classified and given names to. And they think that there are billions of galaxies in the universe. And that just blew my mind because I've always loved astronomy. And she said that in just the Milky Way alone, they think that there are 100 billion planets. So if you were to look at the universe, imagine how many planets there must be that we could have lifetimes on. And that just, I can't even wrap my head around how large that really is. So I think of everything that I saw on the other side during my NDE, I think the planetarium was my favorite. So the next place he took me to, this one was the biggest of all the buildings so far. Again, it was so large that I could not see the end of it. It had to have been miles and miles long. And this one again was made of white marble. It looked like the Parthenon in Greece, only much, much bigger. And in the front of it, it had the big triangle on the face of it, and it had marble columns, but they were only in the front. And there were a whole bunch of marble steps you had to walk up to get to the entry. So we go on the inside, and inside I knew by seeing this now that this was a library, and it had wooden bookshelves that were probably 20 or 30 feet high, just lined with books. And my guide explained to me that anything you ever wanted to learn is in this library. Anything about history or science or music or anything, you can come to this library to learn. And what I found out is we are kind of hardwired, I think, from God at creation to want to learn. Because everybody I've ever met has always loved to learn new things. And I think that God had hardwired all of us to want to learn, because the other side has all kinds of places to learn. And where he took me to in this library was one of those places. Well, inside this library, he took me to an area on the left-hand side where there were all these, what I call video rooms. I don't know what they actually call them, but they looked like video rooms to me. And there were all kinds of them. And he took me to one of them, and there was a woman she had her back to me. She was sitting on a couch, and she had jet black straight hair down to her waist. And she was in this room, and she was watching what we would call today a flat screen TV mounted on the wall. And this was so strange to me back then because my experience happened in 1987, and we didn't have flat screen TVs. We just had those big, huge, bulky ones. So this was amazing for me to see this flat screen TV mounted on this wall. And it was big. It was like maybe 50 centimeters, 50 inches across, something. It was just huge. And my guide said, get closer and look at what she's watching. So I got closer, and what it looked like to me was that she was watching a movie between Native American Indian tribes fighting in a battle against the United States cavalry. Everybody was on horseback. You could hear the guns going off and the whole chaos of war. Well, I thought she was watching a movie. She wasn't. She was actually watching a historic battle that took place 200 years ago between the Native Americans and the United States cavalry. Well, I thought to myself in my mind, how was that possible? We didn't have video cameras back then. I don't think we even had cameras yet. And my guide, he must have heard me say that, or because he said to me, everything gets recorded. And this is what is so extraordinary, because I can't understand how this happens. But everything about our lifetime gets recorded. That's how you can see it during a life review. And that's how you can actually go to these rooms and you can watch living history. So on the other side, if you wanted to learn about, like for me, one thing I want to do when I get back is I want to go to one of these rooms and I want to watch the D-Day Normandy invasion in World War II when they invaded France. I've always been fascinated by that whole episode in history. And I know that I can go there and I can watch what actually happened. And I'm a history buff. I know you might be one too. Probably a lot of your audience loves history. Well, that's one of the things that I just cannot wait to do. Is there are so many things I want to look at and see what really happened, and we can do that by going to these video rooms. And that was the library. The next place he took me to was this gigantic castle, and it looked like the castles just like they have um, in England or in France, the same kind of castles. Beautiful, large stone, perfect castle. And the reason that he took me here is he wanted me to know that if you're on the other side and you wanted to learn about a particular era of Earth history, let's say you wanted to learn about medieval Europe, not only could you go to the library and watch these video screens of medieval Europe, but you could actually go to the buildings that people lived in and see what they looked like. So he tells me to go in. So we go on the inside, and the first thing I notice is the whole inside floor has this red carpeting. Absolutely beautiful. You felt like you were royalty when you walked in. And that's kind of what it felt like for a lot of these castles. They were kind of replicating what people lived like back then. Well, on the left-hand side and the right-hand side were these beautiful stone walls of this castle. And they had pictures, they had paintings, life-size paintings of the people who had lived during that time in Earth's history. King George, Queen Elizabeth, anybody you wanted to learn about, you could go to this castle, you could look at the painting, you could see what they looked like, and you could also see what they were wearing. And that's what they looked like back at that time period. Well, in front of each painting, and there was a painting probably like maybe every 3 or 4 feet apart, as far as you could see were these paintings. Well, in front of every single painting, there was a podium. And on the podium was a book. So I walked up to it, and my guide said, "This is a book about that person's lifetime. So if you were on the other side and you wanted to go learn about this particular era of Earth's history, you could go to the castle, see what they lived in, what these castles looked like. You could go to the wall, you could see what their painting looked like, what the people looked like, what they wore, and you could also go to their book, and you could read through the book, and you could see what they did in their lifetime. You could learn about them." Well, right about then, I looked off to my right, and you know how a lot of those medieval castles had those roundabout stairwells? There was a woman. There was a woman. She was walking down this stairwell, and she had strawberry blonde hair, and she was wearing kind of a peach-colored tunic or a gown of some kind. She walked up to me. She could see me. She walked up to me, and she said, "Is there anything I can help you find?" And Haji, it was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Do you know what I said to her? I said, "No thanks, I'm just looking." I could have asked her anything. I could have asked her, "Who are you? Where am I? I thought I was supposed to be having surgery. What's going on?" But instead I said to her, "No thanks, I'm just looking," like I was buying shoes in a store. Well, my guide said that on the other side, what she loves to do is study history. And she was like what we would call a professor or a scholar of that particular part of Earth's history. So if you wanted to learn about something about medieval Europe, you could go to this building, see the paintings, read the person's book, and you could also ask her questions. And I thought that was so extraordinary to be able to go to see somebody just like you would a teacher, and they could tell you all about that particular Earth's history. So I'm almost at the very end. And the next place he took me to, my guide took me to, was the most beautiful meadow I have ever seen. There were rolling hills and tall grass and wildflowers everywhere. I think it was the most peaceful place that I've ever experienced in my life. Well, I take it back, being close to the ocean. I grew up in California, and I would go to the beach probably once a month and just sit on the beach, and I would feel so spiritual. I'd feel so close to God. And that's what this experience felt like. It was a beautiful day. There was no wind, absolutely beautiful day. And my guide left. He took off. And right in front of me a gentleman showed up, and he had brown hair. He was wearing a white robe, and he had a golden sash around his waist, and he had gold colored sandals that laced up his calves. And he didn't tell me this, I just knew it. But it was who we would call as Jesus, the soul that was Jesus in this lifetime. And he spoke to me. Oh, let me back up real quick. He was different than the other people that I saw. And the reason was because when I went to see his face, there was all this light coming out of his face that I could not see his features. He was just so like a light being. And he spoke to me and he said, "You must tell them there is no death." And the very second he said that, boom, I woke back up in my body in the surgery room with everybody looking down at me. And that was how my story ended. And ever since then, when I was 21, I've been doing what the other side told me to do, which was basically tell people that you must tell them there is no death. So I have lived my life by trying to share my story to anybody who wants to hear it. And that's why I so appreciate you inviting me on your show, because I love to share my story. It's such a story of hope for all of us, knowing that this isn't all there is. And when you lose somebody, they're not gone. They're just in a different place. And when our lifetimes are finished, we're all going to be reunited again. And I just think that's such a hopeful story. Now that was my NDE.